Specific adaptations and structural features found in plant anatomy promote efficient uptake and transport of nutrients and water. In this mini-lecture, we're going to talk about how water and nutrients cycle through plants through two major processes, transpiration and pressure flow. Water plays a crucial role in the life of a plant. Plants use water in very large amounts, and 97% of the water absorbed by the roots is actually evaporated via leaf pores called stomata. What you're looking at, in fact, are not stomata, but it's a very lovely image of water moving through a leaf. In an overview of this process, we can see that water is taken up by the roots and it travels through specialized cells called xylem cells and transpires out of the leaf through pores between specialized cells called guard cells. Water is very finely regulated by the plant to minimize dehydration. A good analogy of this process of transpiration or water movement through vascular plants is to imagine a glass of water that you continuously fill from the bottom, but you allow evaporation on the surface. It's essentially what's happening in a vascular plant like a tree. So let's begin with how water moves from the soil into the root. The absorption of water into roots is also associated with nutrient uptake. That is, as nutrients like phosphorus and nitrates are absorbed or imported into the cell, water will follow by osmosis. Again, note the specialized cells of the root to maximize nutrient and water uptake. We have the root hairs that increase surface area. Root hairs increase the surface area of the root and make up 60% of the root surface area. Again, this is very similar to the microvilli in the intestinal cells. So water travels in bulk through specialized cells in the xylem. So it comes in through the root hairs and eventually makes its way into the vasculature. Xylem cells are very highly differentiated cells to maximize the movement of water. Xylem cells are dead at maturity. And can you think of why? I'll give you a couple minutes, or a couple seconds rather. Why would xylem cells be dead at maturity? Well, think about all those pesky organelles and membranes of a living cell getting in the way of moving water efficiently. Therefore, once xylem cells are fully differentiated, they undergo programmed cell death. The cell dies, everything is removed, and now you have a perfectly hollow tube ready for transport of water. So what is the motive force behind water movement in plants? Some used to think that it was water pressure in the root pushing up the water, but there's no way this positive pressure would be sufficient to push water up a tall tree. Now, in fact, water is pulled up through the vasculature as water evaporates from the leaf surface. In other words, water transpires from the top of the tree and creates a negative tension as the water column pulls water molecules through the xylem. Note that the broad, flat leaves are great for receiving light energy for photosynthesis, but they're also a great transpirational surface. The movement of water through the tree is controlled by a number of factors, but consider whether water would evaporate more quickly or more slowly in very dry air. So think about how weather would affect transpiration rates. Water loss can be controlled in one way by the opening and closing of the pores, the stomata. Stomata are pores in the leaf that allow water to evaporate. They're controlled by the presence of guard cells that are either open or close over the pore. When guard cells are full of water, they become taut. And since they're connected to each other only at the very top and the bottom of the cell, when they become taut with water, the pore opens. When the water is released from the cells, the pore closes. As you can imagine, the easiest way to move water in and out of cells is to move solutes in and out of cells, and the water will follow. So you can imagine that on a hot day, solutes will be actively pumped out of guard cells, and the pores will close, minimizing water loss. Nutrients like sugars are also transported through the plant. Sap flow is not dictated by gravity or moves in one direction, down or up, it turns out that its movement is dictated by areas of supply, called sources, to areas of metabolism of storage, called sinks. So a source is a photosynthetic organ that has more solute than it needs, like a leaf, and a sink is a non-photosynthetic organ or low photosynthetic organ, like a young leaf or a root or a fruit. To offer an analogy of animal physiology, it's sort of like arteries transferring oxygen from sources, lungs, to sinks, respiring cells. The movement of sap, or nutrients like sugar, involves two gradients, a concentration gradient and a pressure gradient. At the source, there's lots of sugar in these cells, and water, which is located in the xylem tissue right next to the phloem tissue, moves into this area. Water movement into this area creates high pressure. So we have a pressure gradient of high water pressure at the source and low water pressure down here. The reason why water pressure is lower at this position in the sink, is that solutes are actively pumped out of these cells, and water will then move back into the xylem. So we have a concentration gradient of high solute to low solute, and a water pressure gradient of high water pressure to low water pressure. So in this mini lecture, we talked about vascular tissue, the xylem and phloem, which transports water and sugars respectively. And we talked about water transport relying on transpiration, which pulls water molecules through specialized xylem cells. Phloem transport relies on two gradients, a pressure gradient and an osmotic gradient, or solute gradient.